Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War, Warhammer 2, Quick Match gameplay. This time around we are on the map a Devastation of Ostermark, playing as the Vampire Counts against the Dwarves. So I did decide to go with a little bit of a, I think, an unconventional composition here, so let's kind of break things down. For my lord, I did decide to bring in the Strigoi Ghoul King, and this definitely isn't someone you will see every day, especially not on foot. Sometimes you will see him come in with Terrorgeist, of course, for that bonus against large and all that good stuff. But here, we're bringing him on foot. He does have monstrous HP pool for a foot lord at 4,032, but his melee stats are pretty pitiful. Only 54 melee attack, 40 melee defense. He does cause poison, though, and have AP damage, which I figured would be very strong against the dwarves. Furthermore, he is very quick on his feet, which does mean he can kind of kite, get an optimal engagement here and there, and that should definitely help him in his trades. He also does have some pretty cool summons available, or some pretty cool abilities available to him. He does have a Bloodlust, which allows him to empower an allied unit for 33 seconds with armor-piercing damage. Opal Amulet for his own survivability. Soul Blight, of course, he does have a mix of Lore of Death and Lore of Vampires, so he does have Soul Blight for the debuff enemy armor and weapon damage. Command of Unliving, which is a unique ability for him that allows him to spawn Crypt Ghouls, or when to overcast Crypt Horrors. Spirit Leech, Invocation of Nehek, and then, of course, the usual sort of vampire abilities like Curse of Undeath and the Hunger to replenish his HP. For my front line here, I did decide to bring a whole bunch of Graveguard with great weapons, 4 units of them, and these guys, of course, did get buffed recently, so they now have 2 more bonus against infantry, so they should definitely trade very, very effectively with the Dwarven infantry line. In my very front, I do have some zombies just to trigger enemy shooting, and as you can see, they're very successful at that, taking enemy fire from the Goblobber as well as, actually just the Goblobber. So my bad. I thought there was a second artillery piece, but there was not. I also do have a Necromancer here on a Corpse Cart. The main reason to bring the Corpse Cart, of course, is to provide the wonderful Vigor Mortis aura, which does provide 5 melee attack and 5 melee defense to nearby units, which could make these Graveguard much more competitive. He also does have the ability to summon dead, Invocation of Nehek, Van Hell's Dance Macabre, as well as the Forbidden Rod to regain Winds of Magic, which is kind of important given that the Strigoi Ghoul King is not the best of casters, though he does, of course, have the option to cast. Outside of that, I do have a whole bunch of flyers. 2 units of Vargeist, including one, the Regiment of Renown, the Devils of Schwarzhofen, and these guys do cause fear, terror, and they can be Vanguard deployed, though I did not do that here. Now, the main reason to bring these guys is because they do cause terror, so if your opponent doesn't bring a very, even if your opponent does have its terror immune front line, you can definitely get the jump on some of the weaker units on the flanks, you can get the jump on their shooting, and perhaps terror out the shooting off the field, which could be very, very useful. They also have very high weapon strength, so even though Dwarf Infantry does have very good armor, these guys will still kind of chew through it somewhat effectively. Out in the sky, I also do have 2 units of Hellbats to shut down enemy Slayers if I do try to kind of land all my flyers at once, and otherwise to kind of zone away enemy flyers like Gyrocopters. In the very back, we do have a single unit of the Feasters in the Dusk, who are the Regiment of Renown Crypt Ghouls with Stalk and Vanguard deployed. Of course, they're Vanguard deployed in the very back, ready to go. They are a little faster than vanilla Crypt Ghouls as well. Finally, on the flanks, we do have 2 units of Black Knights. These guys are not very powerful, but they are fairly cheap, and I'm able to field 2 units of them. Against Dwarves, they're actually pretty effective. They can definitely get on top of their infantry, apply some pressure to the backline, all that sort of stuff. Though, of course, here my opponent's backline is somewhat lacking. It's basically just an artillery piece backed by 2 Gyrocopters. Now, my opponent definitely decided to go for a very infantry-heavy-centric build himself. You can see he brought Thorgrim Grudgebearer with his Great Big Book of Grudges, the High King ability, which does provide Frenzy when he drops below 50% HP. Stand Your Ground, as well as Foe Seeker, a Runesmith, of course, for the Rune of Wrath and Ruin, as well as the Hammer of Karakstrak, I do believe, which is a great melee debuff. And then he does have the Goblobber, applying artillery pressure to me. It does provide a leadership debuff, which is actually really strong against undead, and more so than someone would expect, simply because undead have very low leadership to begin with. My opponent also does have multiple great weapon units on the ground. He does have 2 Longbeards with great weapons, the Grumbling Guard, Miners with Blasting Charges, Ekron Miners, and then finally the Warriors of Dragonfire Pass, all making up the front line, allowing him to kind of mess up my troops before they manage to close the distance with those satchel charges, to cause some havoc, and then to cause some havoc against the heavy armor values of my Graveguard. My opponent also does have 2 units of Slayers. You can see he has normal Slayers over here, as well as the Dragonback Slayers still defending the Goblobber against my intervention. Over here, my opponent also does have the 2 Gyrocopters, as we mentioned before, who are flying around, and they can obviously apply very heavy pressure to large units. Now, unfortunately, my opponent made a serious mistake here, and he did not bring any infantry shooting units. That's one of those important things. If you're going to bring Gyrocopters, be sure to bring Thunders or Quarrelers or something like that, because you can zone away bats very, very effectively. I mean, you can see, though, my Graveguard are going to close the gap, and they're going to start slicing and dicing their way through these Miners rather efficiently. Miners don't have good melee stats at all, not even the high veterancy ones, so they will get sliced up pretty bad by the Graveguard. Over here you can see the miners with, or the miners with great weapons. The graveyard with great weapons pushing into the fray, the necromancer in the fight, the popping forbidden rod and invocation of Nehek, and in the meantime the Black Knights plowing into the Dragonback Slayers, applying some pressure there with their charge, and the Devils of Schwarzhofen do descend on top of the Longbeards, who are of course immune to psychology, but they can also tear up the miners with blasting charges pretty effectively and provide backup to these Graveguard who are otherwise very weak. Over here the Vargeists have dropped on the miners with blasting charges and are applying great pressure to them and just kind of tearing them in shreds here in melee. Black Knights did manage to outmaneuver the Slayers, who are actually getting caught here by the Feasters in the Dusk, and the Feasters in the Dusk, of course, can do immense amounts of work to the unarmored, somewhat low melee defense Slayers. In the meantime, my bats are still pursuing the gyrocopters, just trying to keep the pressure on them. And of course, the Slayers, as they get poisoned, will get kind of dragged into the muck here by the Feasters in the Dusk, who are of course just very, very potent. You can see they're just dragging these guys down and just slaughtering the Slayers very quickly. My opponent is still trying to get these guys back into the fight to deal with all this large, but it's really not working out for me. You can see the miners here getting slaughtered, the Longbeards are getting dragged down, and things are definitely looking a bit grim. Fortunately for me, though, the Devils of Schwarzhofen are getting caught on the ground. You can see the Dragonback Slayers jumping into the fray and just causing immense amounts of work here, devastating my Black Knights, and the Black Knights will really not be able to disentangle themselves. They're just getting slaughtered, and the Slayers with their immense weapon strength, especially against the low armor of the Black Knights, at least for heavy cap, 80 armor is not great, are just going to slaughter them to a man. Over here you can see the Graveguard with great weapons still slugging it out, being pretty effective against the Longbeards. I do believe that in a 1-to-1 the Graveguard would win, though obviously with the miners interfering and the Slayers interfering and all that sort of stuff, it might not be the case. Over here another Rune of Wrath and Ruin going down, brutalizing my Graveguard. The zombies are slowly but surely dying, but as you can see, they're not dying that quickly, and they're definitely mucking up my opponent's troops. Another unit of zombies that dropped on the back line is being a nuisance there. And over here you can see the gyrocopters are being interfered with by the bats. The bats finally did get their hands on them, or their little claws on them, and are kind of tearing these gyros up somewhat quickly. With their terrible melee defense, the gyrocopters are actually pretty susceptible despite their high armor and survivability. Over here, the Crypt Ghouls are tearing up the Dragonback Slayers. They're actually, once again, they'll do pretty well with their poison debuffs. It's definitely never underestimated some of these anti-squish units against Dwarves. Dwarves have some squish units. Slayers are one of them. Their artillery crews are another. You can see out here in the air, the gyrocopters with brimstone guns getting torn up by the bats, and I'm trying to get the Devils of Schwarzhofen up in the sky to really engage my opponent's troops. These were actually a summoned unit of Crypt Ghouls, so that was my mistake. Those weren't the Feasters in the Dusk. The Feasters are actually over here, tearing up the Slayers, putting the last one in the dirt over there. I did throw my Strigoi Ghoul King into the fray here against these Longbeards. The reason, of course, being that the Strigoi Ghoul King, I don't really want him fighting Thorgrim. Thorgrim hits like a truck and has very high melee defense. So against this guy's low melee stats, Thorgrim will actually do really well. This guy also doesn't have very good armor at all. 15 armor is just pitiful. In the meantime, though, my center here is definitely buckling. You can see the Necromancer, a dreadful state here. Popping Forbidden Rod, though. The Graveguard with great weapons here are not long for this world. These Graveguard are slicing and dicing their way through the miners, but Graveguard doesn't have, with great weapons, doesn't have great melee defense, so they're actually going to suffer pretty badly against the AP on the miners. In the meantime, the bats are dragging the gyrocopters with brimstone guns into the muck, but at the same time, the Necromancer is being shredded, despite the help of the invocation of Nehek. And over here, the Strigoi Ghoul King is just causing some immense work to these secret miners, dragging down the Warriors Dragonfire Pass, and basically just massacring these troops who are in the pits here. You can see my opponent is trying to remand the guns, but I'm sending those Devils of Schwarzhofen after his artillery crews, just trying to pick them off. They don't have the best of armor, and they will get jumped and terrified here by the Vargeists, who are of course just disgustingly powerful against them. Unfortunately for me, though, the Slayers are definitely here on their hot on their tail. Perhaps I could have engaged. The Slayers are definitely pretty squishy, so against Vargeists they will die. But of course they hit like trucks. 55 weapon strength with that bonus against large is just brutal. So they could cause some immense work, so I do start disengaging here with the Devils and just leave the bats to finish them off. In the meantime, you can see these bats are chasing away the gyrocopters with brimstone guns. These gyrocopters have actually been kind of zoned away, and I'm not actually pursuing them at the moment. In the meantime, Feasters in the Dusk is still very healthy, sitting at 78 kills, and I'm surrounding my opponent's troops and kind of beating them to death here. With the help of the Vargeist, somewhat healthy unit of Graveguard here at 53 models. We are slowly but surely just chewing through the Grumbling Guard, Thorgrim, and his lackey here, the Runesmith. The Runesmith has, of course, been debuffed, so he will not simply be able to spam Runes of Wrath and Ruin like he could before. You can see my opponent has dropped the Rune of Wrath and Ruin on the Feasters in the Dusk, causing some immense hurt here. But I do believe this is his last cast, and once that's gone, my opponent's going to be in deep trouble. You can also see these Dragonback Slayers not really having the HP anymore, and they will get kind of torn down by the Graveguard with great weapons. Up in the sky, the bats do get on top of the gyros. I do pull my Devils of Schwarzhofen into the sky. The Graveguard here, victorious against the Longbeards and Miners, is going to crumble and disintegrate, thanks to it's simply, at this point, tanking morale. So at this point, things are definitely looking kind of iffy for both sides. I'm still pursuing these gyrocopters with the bats, trying to just get them off the battlefield. My opponent has a recovering unit of Dragonfire. Where's Dragonfire pass? And my Strigo Ghoul King, you can see, is just getting torn apart by Thorgrim as well as the Runesmith. And just, really, they're laying the smackdown on this poor guy. He's down to 1700 HP, and I'm really trying to disentangle him, get him out of the fight, because he's just, with that pitiful melee defense, he's just not able to hold his ground, and I'm trying to get him out as quick as I can. Fortunately, though, with this Spear Leech on Thorgrim, as well as the pressure applied by the Graveguard with their AP, and decent armor, of course, is going to be useful against Thorgrim. They are slowly but surely just chipping away at this Runesmith. They do still have these Vargheist in there. The Vargheist have monstrous melee attack at 46, thanks to Frenzy, as well as weapon strength. So even against Thorgrim, they'll do okay. And slowly but surely, they'll just chip away at him. In the meantime, I'm just simply running around with the Strigo Ghoul King, trying to keep these guys' leadership up without actually endangering him at all. In the meantime, the Devils of Schwarzhofen are coming back, and they are going to start diving down on these guys and tearing them to shreds, and really applying the pressure to this Runesmith, who does actually get terrified, and is going to start. That's actually going to be a big problem for my opponent, because he can't really protect him. Thorgrim is chasing the Strigo Ghoul King, who is in his own, at the same time chasing the Grumbling Guard. You can see down to 124 HP here, just a few models, but I do want to get him off the field, because every model counts at this point. That's really important at late game to just chase units down. You can see I do manage to shatter him, even as Thorgrim here, running around on his Dwarf Wagon. The Runesmith does recover from being tear routed, but it's not really enough at this point. He breaks for good. You can see the Vargheists, despite being hit by the Hammer of Carrick Strak, are going to take back into the skies. They'll be fine. And the Runesmith is routed, so despite the fact that I will lose the Graveguard here, the Runesmith is just going to be pursued off the field, and he's kind of getting beaten down by the Feaster in the Dust, the Graveguard. Thorgrim is in the fray there. I'm just circling around with the Strigo Ghoul King, and really trying to get rid of these heroes. Thorgrim is a monster in his own right, so really if he gets into if he holds his ground here and gets that Runesmith back online, I will be in deep trouble. So that's why I'm really trying to concentrate on this guy and knock this Runesmith out for good. Anytime the bats are finally zoning away the Gyrocopter, which will ensure that I have a bunch of units still on the field, or well, a lot of supporting units on the field, and hopefully some little unit that can zone away the Runesmith. In the meantime, this other unit of Hellbats is coming into the fray. You can see Thorgrim is actually not doing a bad job of chasing down the Strigo Ghoul King, who is of course very tired at this point. And so Thorgrim here does get attacked by the bats, gets swarmed, but of course they're not going to do very much. And if he decides to lay the smackdown on him, he will. Fellbats have no armor, actually, not terrible armor, just no armor. Not much leadership, and atrocious weapon strength. So you can see they're going down like 9 pins. Really not much they can do. So I do try to take back off and pull him away from Thorgrim before he can kill too many of them. In the meantime, on the ground, the Runesmith is still being pursued. You can see he's sitting at 529 HP. Not shattered yet, so I definitely need to keep pursuing him until he leaves the field. Obviously, at this point, he probably doesn't have any charges of Rune of Wrath and Ruin, but nonetheless, he's still an okay melee combatant, especially against most of these units that I've got left. Most of them just don't have the greatest melee stats. You can see that these Vargheists do still have their Frenzy. That's one of those important things to keep in mind. Frenzy is just so potent, and it's really going to allow them to hit targets pretty effectively. Even someone like Thorgrim with his monstrous melee defense will still get hit about 20% of the time by the Vargheists, with 47 to 62. Yeah, you're looking at about a 30% hit rate from the Vargheists if we discount charge. Unfortunately, the Devils of Schwarzhofen, and the Devils of Schwarzhofen actually have an even better chance of hitting. Fortunately, I'm really out of magic at this point. I do stick my Strigo Ghoul King to chase the Runesmith, trying to swamp Thorgrim instead. Thorgrim does pop Foe Seeker here, and really just kind of laying the smack on some of these troops, messing up the Devils of Schwarzhofen pretty horrible. And I'm really not able to just bust through that melee defense, especially as he pops Stand Your Ground and starts tearing through my troops. Unfortunately, the Devils are just disintegrating, so there's really not much of a hope of saving him. Over here, though, I do chase the Runesmith down, and he finally does actually, I do believe, die. You can see his bloody corpse there. So now it's really down to the wire. It's down to, can Thorgrim beat down this blob of infantry, of which most can't really hurt him? The Feasters in the Dusk, of course, have atrocious AP values. The Vargheists don't have the best of AP values, though they should do some damage just thanks to their weapon strength. And that only leaves the Graveguard, but the Graveguard have terrible melee stats. They probably have the minimal 10-15% chance to hit against Thorgrim, and he's obviously not infantry. He counts as large, so they're not really. So they're definitely going to struggle to hit him. And Strigo Ghoul King's kind of circling around. I can't afford to lose the Strigo Ghoul King at this point. I do try to get a little bit of charge there, get a little hit in on Thorgrim, but I just miss. Fortunately, we are debuffing Thorgrim with poison from the Feasters in the Dusk, which is really kind of a big win for me here, because otherwise this situation would be very, very grim. So you can see I do cycle in there with the Strigo Ghoul King, and I'm trying to escape. So we're going to throw things in the fast forward as we slowly but surely chip away at Thorgrim. And you can see Thorgrim is just doing some major work. Slaughtering the Fellbats. This unit will actually disintegrate. There's simply no way of saving him. I don't have any more heals. In the meantime, it's Graveguard, Vargheists, and Crypt Ghouls against Thorgrim, and they're whittling him down, but it's very slow and tedious process. And I do try to get some charges in there with the Strigo Ghoul King, and yet clobbered in the return. You can see Thorgrim actually does manage to take the Vargeist down. They have very low armor, so my opponents, I think, had a slightly bad target prioritization there. The Vargeist, despite being large and squishy, were not really as dangerous as the Graveguard with their huge AP values, or for that matter, even the Feasters in the Dusk with their poison damage. So really, my opponent, I think, really needed to kill off the Graveguard. Had he managed to clobber the Graveguard down here, he would have been in a much better position. He does manage to connect with the Strigoi Ghoul King, but I do pop the Opal Amulet, providing me with some damage mitigation, and kind of start pulling away, and of course take advantage of that 50%. Or 50 move speed to get away. And at this point, Thorgrim, you can see, is wavering. He's definitely struggling against the Graveguard. The Graveguard at this point is up to 3 chevrons, so they're hitting like absolute trucks. Even that, despite all the lack of bonus, they'll be really good against Thorgrim just for the damage. You can see he's being slowed. Actually, I don't believe he's being slowed right now by the Feasters in Dusk. They haven't managed to land a hit on him in quite some time. It's very difficult for him, obviously. So we do manage to get a bit of a connection here. I do manage to land a hit with the Strigoi Ghoul King, and that is going to be game for our friend the Grudge Bearer. So a very tight game. Definitely some mistakes going on I would say on both sides. I think my opponent's biggest mistake was actually a composition error. He simply didn't bring any shooting units that could shoot up to support his brimstone guns. Had he had, say, 2 units of Quarrelers, 2 units of Rangers, something like that, he could have easily zoned away my Vargeists and Fellbats and shot my front line to bits. Just being able to get a few more kills in a game like this would have been enough to really turn the tide and secure him that win. As it turned out, the Gyrocopters got zoned away, really got a bare minimum done, got kind of slaughtered by the Fellbats and to an extent by the Vargeist, and really just couldn't get very much through. In my own turn, I definitely wasted the Black Knights a little bit, committing him a little too soon. I should have waited for my Crypt Ghoul summon to go through before bringing him into the charge. And I definitely made some mistakes in kind of the way I clumped my Graveguard and the way I allowed my Graveguard to absorb the satchel charges. I definitely should have perhaps summoned zombies, and it's something I didn't really think of at the time, but I could have perhaps summoned zombies on top of my opponent's miners, or used my Lord or my Necromancer to soak up those satchel charges and allow my Graveguard to advance much more uncontested. For my opponent, definitely the Slayers did huge work. The Grumbling Guard, of course, huge work. Thorgrim himself did some crazy work. But otherwise, I think this comp was largely pretty decent. Definitely, I would consider some more foot shooting in favor rather than the Gyrocopters. I'm not the biggest fan of Gyrocopters myself, especially not against the Vampire Counts, who don't have really too many units where you would need them. Because Vampire Counts monsters tend to be very squishy, you can generally get away with just lower end shooting. And had my opponent just brought a handful of Quarrelers instead, he could have easily shot up my lighter troops, my Flyers, even the Black Knights, and obviously the Feasters in the Dusk, and then still had some damage left to deal with the Graveguard. Nonetheless, great game to my opponent, Subsola. Definitely the game came right down to the wire. It was fun trying out the Strigoi Ghoul King and giving the Feasters in the Dusk a chance. You can see the Feasters did immense work. 86 kills on a unit with terrible AP against the Dwarves. It's really, really pretty potent. And it shows how if you use them in an optimal manner to shut down Slayers and that sort of stuff, they're huge. So nonetheless, great game to my opponent, as mentioned before. I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. If you have any comments, criticism, or anything like that, be sure to post it down in the comments for me to read. So, as usual, guys, I do appreciate you all for watching. I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.